Welcome to the Seattle Overload podcast, where we're launching a new format. We have a special guest to help us preview the Seahawks' first game of the season and his outside impressions of the Seahawks from a national perspective. Nate Tice, former quarterback at Wisconsin. He coached and scouted in the NFL, and he now does brilliant Athletic Football Show podcast. He also launched a new column, the Overhang column at Yahoo Sports, covering college and pro football. I love how he illustrates football with popular culture references and stuff. You should check his work out if you haven't already. And most importantly, he endorsed Griff and I's work, which is far too nice of him. But Nate, thank you so much for doing this. Nate Tice, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. What a wonderful intro. That was just lovely. I feel at home already. I'm glad I could give you guys a shout out. I told you this, Maddie, in the pre-show was that, what we're going to talk about tonight. It's like the offensive side, I definitely can hang, but I was like, I probably learned more about the defensive side of the Seahawks from you guys than you guys could probably learn from me. It's like, I know the gist of it, but there's a lot of times I want to check your guys' like crosswork, like quality control. Like, hey, am I right here, or what are you guys seeing? Because the knowledge that you guys know about the Seahawks, like I learned from you guys, so I'm so happy to come on to the show with you guys as well.
That's very kind of. I learned what I know from. Let's see, can I do that from that guy anyway? So it's just like
the weatherman, like pointing.
Right, exactly.
This is if you're listening, it's fun pointing going on. So make sure you check out the YouTube.
Yeah.
So, I guess Nate, overall, what do you think about the Seahawks from afar, just as an overall macro kind of deal? Like
the rebuild happened quickly. Or should I say the reload, the post-Russell era was like very short felt. I was more bullish on the Seahawks last year than I think a lot of the national consensus was. I also, on my podcast, for whatever reason, there was not a lot of Seahawks talk last year, so I didn't really get to like share that. But I'm on the record on some gambling shows of saying that I'm bullish on the Seahawks and what Pete Carroll and this team could do. And I thought they'd be feisty, around 500. The fact that they made a playoffs is like, I thought that they nailed the draft. There's a lot of players I liked that they took, and they actually all succeeded very early on, even offense and defense, and that'll jumpstart any rebuild. There's several teams that nailed the draft last year, the Seahawks and the Chiefs, and that made me optimistic about both teams, and how they used them was just perfectly. But it was just, I think they're ahead of schedule. They have some talented players on both sides. This was even going last year, but continuing into this year, they feel just like an interesting team, and I think a good team. But they do have some holes but that's what makes them interesting. And I think that they can go, there's so many paths that this team can go this year that has continued from last year. It's pretty cool to see this team taking a step forward, new quarterback, kind of new identity that they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were a team that, for better or worse, I just don't see a Pete Carroll team bottoming out completely. Right. They hang on, and that was seen as a criticism for a second. They're like, no, they need to tank. They need to completely embrace sucking, so that they can bounce back. But yeah, I was right there with you, which was kind of it might have been seen as a homer take, but it was really an offbeat take, because there was a lot of sentiment of this regime is over. They're dead men walking. I just couldn't see them dying out, really. And yeah, they were treading water, and obviously they hit it big with Geno, and they were able to be competitive.
That's exactly it. It was just like you said, Pete Carroll's always going to make their guys competitive. Like even like when he first started in Seattle, like they made the playoffs kind of, before the Legion of Boom, like the early stages of the Legion of Boom, making the playoffs with when there was the Beastquake year against the Saints. It's like he kind of had those teams that were incomplete, like very competitive. And right. I don't know. I just think it was just, they had a lot of competency at a lot of spots. So it was like, I don't see this team failing. Like they don't seem like they're just like bad. They just seem more just, they just say we're quad boxing. There we go. They're just seeing more just a team that just like was reloading. But I just think that they reloaded quicker than even I anticipated.
Right.
Yeah. And it's quite funny because you go back to that Beastquake era, the following years, what happened, I think now that Pete Carroll's proved people wrong, there's clearly a PR campaign going on in the background of of should he go, should he not go, and all that stuff. He's kind of won that deal, and now they've got Geno Smith. But you mentioned last year, Nate. At what point did you think Geno was kind of real and better than majority opinion? Because not to toot our own horns, but Griff was very early on that, and yes, I was fairly early, like September. But you're from a national perspective and not a maniac delving into the film all the time. So when did you believe?
It was one of those where, okay, I was a little higher than most people, but I thought it would be more like the 20th best quarterback, like low 20s, somewhere around there. Competency, because of what I've seen Griff say, our friend Steven Ruiz, Greg Rosenthal, there's people that I trust that are kind of like, hey, there's more to him, than I think people are anticipating. And I think even Griff pointed out a lot of things. He opens up things that Russ never could ever access. And I would say the game that it was like, okay, I'm into this, was the Falcons game, week 3.
Yeah, I think
2 or 3. Yeah, it was early September. I can tell you that. That game, because I watched all of it, and because it was more because I was interested in the Falcons, as anyone that listens to our podcast knows. And so I watched every minute of that game, every snap of that game, and I was like, they're doing some cool shit with Geno, and they're letting it rip. And it was real big boy stuff, like big quarterback stuff, real throws, not a lot of training wheels. But I've always liked what Shane Waldron does, and I know we'll talk about him in a minute, because he kind of can get to a lot of things. And with Geno, he's getting to everything. And I just thought it was cool. It's explosive. They're attacking down the field. I know the Falcons defense is a good one to kind of, try some stuff on, especially last year. But that was the game that I was kind of like, okay, I'm into this. This is real. I think he could be into that good tier. And he sustained it for most of the season, which was really cool. And I think it's stuff that I do think is sustainable. It's not stuff that I think is training wheels or luck. I really do. And starting with that game is when I started to believe.
Yeah, and you talk about training wheels. One of the early indicators for me, going back to even preseason, like forget about results, just from an outsider perspective, and obviously you have the insider perspective. One of the signals that I would think to draw from is, what are the play calls? Because that's indicative of what they think he can handle. And it's preseason week 2 Chicago, and they're giving him 7-step concepts on 3rd and 5.
Yeah,
and it's like the McVay offense with Goff. I mean, even though Goff can be a high level executor if the picture's clean, they're not putting that much on his shoulders in drop back game. They're making sure he hits that dig route or that 7-yard inbreaker. So I'm curious how much in hindsight. Now it's easy to say this in hindsight, but in your eyes, when you're putting that on his shoulders, is that them just getting that tape out there so they can eval him, or is that like, hey, we actually think this guy can handle a lot more, and we're giving it to him in training camp and preseason?
It was training camp, preseason, and probably practice. It was probably y'all start. A lot of teams start with the similar-ish install plays the first 4 or 5 days of camp, and then you start leaning into, or you hope to lean into, okay, this is what this guy's good at. That's why teams with like the Drew Breeses and the Sean Paytons of the world are amazing, because they already know what they're good at. So now you're adding tweaks and adding stuff and adding gizmos and stuffs and gadgets and little stuff that you can add to your core plays. So obviously they were comfortable calling that with them, because they didn't really run stuff that they ran with Russ. Like the stuff that I picture Geno just doing so exceptionally well is the empty formation stuff.
Right.
And because how he attacks out of empty. But you don't do that without trusting a quarterback to get to that, because that's like a license to kill kind of thing. Sure. That's like, you have to earn that right that we call that play, and you have to earn that right that we call that play in the game. So that he was tested somewhere in practice, or where he earned that trust. And I think as the season went along, they're like, throw it at him, like give it to him, because he can handle all these things. So the coaches aren't going to call that stuff, because that's the 301 stuff without you proving it first in practice, especially coaches like this that have been in the NFL, not some young first-time offensive coordinator that thinks everything is going to work out great.
Right.
Well, on that point, it's
sorry, real quick. I just wanted to ask him real quick. Sorry, Nate. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, real quick, what do you think the presence of JSN does for Geno? Does for this receiving core?
Oh man, it makes just that. It starts kind of like with the weakness. So I think with last year's Seahawks, or it became a weakness, was that they're siloed. It was like, this personnel grouping, we do this. out of 11 personnel, we do this, and everybody's kind of islandish, good or bad. Like, you have two good outside receivers, but when you kind of get into that island, the Bengals can do this because they have Tyler Boyd in the slot along with their two beasts on the outside and make all three guys different islands that you could pick and choose. JSN makes that 11 personnel. You could live in it. It's not something that it's not something that was a part of the offense that now could be a featured, fully formed thing. I think I prefer always to have one of those receivers be a good blocker so you can open up more in the run game. But there's ways to mitigate that even sometimes I don't credit coaches nowadays enough for. And then it's something that's more draft and scouting wise that I need to broaden my mind about some of these things. But I think even with JSN is that when you have a guy like Geno that can attack high lows, now you're weaponizing three spots along with some nice complementary pieces with the tight ends. So I think that's what it is. It's making that 11 personnel just every option is available and every option is a plus matchup. It's not, you're not taking away the two awesome matchups with Lockett and DK. And now it's like, okay, well, we got pick or poison. Okay. Now we got JSN who can rip off 12-yard gains, just do and be that singles and doubles hitter that defenses are going to hate that. So that's what it does. It just makes that 11 personnel just more viable for snap to snap basis.
And how much do you think the presence of JSN in the offense, considering like what we think of, so it's almost been a meme at this point with the McVay offenses, with the Waldron offenses. What does JSN do with the presence or with DK's presence in the offense? Because they fully embrace DK being DK and they don't shoehorn him into that pre-existing idea of what we all assume the McVay offense to be. So does JSN allow DK to continue to be even more DK, and then JSN and Tyler Lockett can kind of pick up the slack?
I think it's most going to weaponize Lockett even more because of the two-man game that they can run. Because in my head, I'm picturing them as the slot and the Z being on the same side a lot and stack alignments. Now you got Lockett as a vertical guy. You can keep him off ball. JSN's running the underneath route, and like you can create some cool high lows with that. That's kind of how I picture in my head. But even now DK, if say they want to get into some different kind of formations, like a slot formation, okay, or a 1x3 formation where the tight end's the lone guy and they could go trips on the other side with three receivers. Now it can still be JSN, Lockett, and then DK on the outside. Or DK in the slot going vertical, and JSN could be the underneath guy. You want to keep DK on the move. You don't want him stopping. Yeah. You don't want him breaking too much. You want to keep him vertical. Yeah. But now, no matter every route, a good route concept, this is why I kind of get hesitant with quick game. Geno can do quick game, but that's kind of cool because they don't lean into it too much. Is now there's always going to be a vertical element on a play on a traditional 5 or 7 step concept, as you guys know. DK could always be the vertical guy, or Lockett could be the vertical guy, and DK could be the intermediate guy. It's just he's only going to be asked to do what he's good at, and that's the trickle down effect. So again, to what you're getting at, I think that boost effect that JSN has is going to be just awesome because now everyone's going to just do their strengths.
So when it comes to Geno Smith's regression last year, is this kind of, it's not regression proof, everyone can regress, but is this a big step towards that given, the weeks 1 to 13, 10 to 20 yard throws, Geno's throwing 82.8% catchable percentage. Then weeks 14 to 18, when receivers get banged up, that catchable percentage drops by 17.7% to 65.1% in the 10 to 20 yard windows. Is this the big thing, or are there other stuff that you saw Geno regressing with, which wasn't just receiving options?
Yeah, it was just overall kind of banged upness. I also felt the interior line started getting kind of gamed up a little bit. And Geno is a solid athlete, but any quarterback with interior pressure is going to kind of, it's not going to go well, especially if you're attacking downfield. I also thought they just played more difficult opponents. 49ers, Chiefs had a better defense than people realized. Like after their bye week last year, they were a top 10 defense, all success rate and EPA and all that stuff. Jets, the Rams, who were kind of but then the 49ers again. But so I think also they just played better defenses. They weren't fully weaponized and fully healthy or they're just working through a bunch of things. So I think that kind of let some things unravel a little bit. I thought this team was a year ahead of schedule. anyways. And that's kind of what happens when you're ahead of schedule. As the season goes along, you have more data out there. Your weaknesses just get poked at over and over and over. That's why playoff football is so hard, because coaches have 17 games to look at. And so then they go, perfect example. Sorry, I'm ranting here, but perfect example is
go ahead.
The Chiefs against the Eagles in the Super Bowl. The little touchdown to Sky Moore, the little like fake motion going back and jet motion out. It's because they watched every red zone play of the Eagles defense from the entire year. And they watched the Jaguars game in like week 4. And they were like, oh, we like that. We're going to use that. And they got 2 touchdowns off of it. In a normal, when you're scouting an opponent during the season, you just look at the previous 4 games and maybe one extra game where you played them before. But in the playoffs, you're watching everything. So I think that's where what happens is those weaknesses got poked at. They played better opponents, yada, yada, yada. That's why I think this year I'm a little more excited. I think there's going to be even more sustainability in the run game to help them out. And I think that's why I like the Seahawks even more, even though they had a pretty good offense last year.
Yeah, I love how on your podcast you brought up the efficiency of Zach Charbonnet in college on first and second down, being the most efficient, highest success rate running back on those downs, when you also mentioned Kenneth Walker's inefficiency and how he's terrible efficiency-wise on early downs, like abysmal.
He's boomer bust. That's what he is. I call him Sonic. I'm trying to make it stick.
Yeah, what am I trying to say? My take with Ken Walker is that he's Christian Michael with contact balance in terms of style and just explosiveness and burst.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
But with the same drawbacks too. But he can get better too, though. I think
that's the thing. Well, I mean, he was really good. I had similar grade on him as Breece Hall, who I loved as well. Right. It was just that there's gonna be a couple of runs you get frustrated with, but he'll create 3 runs that most guys aren't even try. So that's the typical boomer bust guy. That's the same as Jahmyr Gibbs that everyone's high on with the Lions. It's just that those types of running backs are gonna be frustrating on a couple of runs, but the better the offensive line or more sustainable the offensive line, the better those kind of bad plays are. If that makes sense. It's a 0-yard gain or 1-yard gain as opposed to -2. And it's a 3-yard gain instead of -1. And then now it's 20 yards or more sustainable. Not I would say sustainable, but they happen more often or more frequently. So that the Charbonnet addition was, I already liked him scouting wise. Saw those stats, looked them up on SIS. And then you always want to answer. It's like, is that because of the offensive line? Is that the scheme? Is it luck? Is it kind of just some weird things? Offensive line for UCLA was not good. Chip Kelly did a couple nice things, but it's just Zach Charbonnet just getting every yard that was blocked for him. So that's why I was like, that's where that Nick Swisher comparison came into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Shane Waldron, that's a guy who I know Griff was very keen to ask you about. We don't really know much about him because in press conferences he is kind of coy and doesn't say anything but says a lot. That kind of approach, fair enough. He's obviously got the Sean McVay background. He had a cup of coffee in New England too, which is interesting to me because like this preseason they run Hoss Duke. Like who doesn't run Hoss Duke? But when you got JSN, that's suddenly a bit more exciting. What are your impressions of Waldron?
He's, to me, him and Matt LaFleur have more in common than I think people realize. As far as what they call nowadays, I think I call this type of offense a greatest hits offense. They have some bones everywhere because you just even got to think who the offensive line coach was until this year. That's a long-time offensive line coach who's been in several different offenses as well, and you can see some influence there. And then passing game wise, you're talking about Hoss Duke. That's actually great. That's a great example. Also, some of the empty stuff. You see some Shanahan McVay stuff, the stick nods, those types of concepts. But then you see the high lows that are they're not uncommon, but you don't see them in a Shanahan McVay offense. So that's where the kind of greatest hits. And you got to think just who some of the assistants were. They were pre-Waldron. So you got a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of grab back. That's what's gotten pretty cool with these Shanahan guys kind of going elsewhere is not all of them are just wholesale Shanahan staffs. So now you get these kind of like okay, we got the run game from like the Browns are a good example. They got the run game of Bill Callahan. They run the pass game of Stefanski, who has some Shanahan Kubiak influence. And then they got a couple other things sprinkled in from other offenses that they've been in. That's kind of what the Seahawks is. So I call it greatest hits with maybe they're right. It's like someone that's like 40% Irish. You know, it's like they're like 35%, you know, McVay, Shanahan, 22%, you know, Patriots, you know, their kind of offense, and then the rest is just, you know, mutt.
And what am I trying to say? To your point on like LaFleur and McVay or LaFleur and Waldron having similarities. Both those guys also have like the not classic, but the max split X receiver on their team. Yeah. At least when LaFleur had Devontae anyway, and is trying to with Watson. Then obviously DK Metcalf. I mean, they're going to influence a lot of your structure, right? Like not just your plays, even, but your formation structure. I would think
it's the traditional vertical X, and so that's where quick game doesn't get lean into that much. But that's kind of like hard to say because there's still the package play element with Devontae Adams, you know, as far as the bubbles and the smokes. DK, I don't feel like is that kind of player. I know
he's not breaking those big dig routes either. But
everything's got to be 8 yards or further with him. Yeah. Like it's just how he is. Some guys are just built that way. Mike Evans is kind of similar. Mike Evans is a little more fluid and everything, but it's like it's slants, it's posts, it's digs, it's I think stop routes because you just post them up. Or back shoulders, but he's a big receiver that kind of plays small sometimes, so you got to use that. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir.
He will be strong through the route, but as soon as he leaves his feet,
catch point.
That's why I'm so excited about JSN because, as you've said, Nate, it lets DK run more of that stuff basically.
Vertical.
Yes. So you are preaching to the choir here.
And that's the thing is that when you do have a change up where you're not gonna have DK do it every time, but it's like he majors in that, and it's just nice when you just have everyone majors in this, you major in this, you play guitar, you play drums, you play bass, we're good. You know, okay. Once in a while you get a Paul McCartney who just can play everything. It's like, you know, it's like honestly, I didn't say that just because we have a English cast or English host.
I don't sound like a Scouser though. So
do you feel appealed to, Maddie?
Yes. But honestly, that's just how kind of the passing game has to be. You need 3 to 5 guys that need to be played to their strengths. That's what Kyle Shanahan's fantastic at because he does a good job of doing that with his guys.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right, wait, hold on. One last thing on Waldron. Unless Maddie, you had another Waldron.
Well, I was going to try and tee that up for you.
Do it.
12 personnel. You wanted to talk about it, Griff.
Well, I mean, you kind of mentioned it, how like they shift to empty at a 12. That's how they get mismatches because they can really spread it out. But what I was going to, and this is also kind of related. But do you have any pontifications on their pistol usage? Because they used a lot of pistol last year, and not for like quarterback run game stuff, like legit hiding tendency and everything.
That's what it is.
Because they ran real drop back out of it.
That's what it is. It's hiding tendency. Usually, you're doing that with drop back is to hide the running back going strong. So, like when you try to create like a 4x1. That's to hide the backs, kind of like going that way. So as opposed to motioning up, like the Chiefs love to, you know, motion the guy from weak to strong, they are just hiding it pre-snap. And probably Geno, I feel like Geno's okay under center, but it's maybe just a way to just kind of get him back a little bit, especially if you don't trust your interior line. And also bootleg game. Anything like that, movement throws a little bit, that kind of hides it too, or helps it out a little bit too. It's a little more fluid out of that, but it's just like you just nailed it. It's a tendency tell. That's the biggest thing that you use pistol for, unless you're just trying to help old man Peyton Manning in 2015 with the Broncos.
Right.
That's what Geno basically told me in Munich, that they were it's hiding tendencies, but you know, obviously a press conference type of answer. Moving over to the Rams, what is their defense other than Aaron Donald? Because we definitely don't know, and Nate, you do cover the league nationally, so perhaps you have more of an inkling of what the Rams are.
No, it's every time I look up their roster, I see a guy named Russ Yeast, and I'm just like, no way. Is there a guy named Russ Yeast on this roster? Do
Great
you guys?
name.
Great. I'm on a Seattle
He's
podcast.
rising.
There is the nice. There
Eat the
is
ball.
the old Ken Griffey Jr. video games. He was the only one that had the licensed name, so everybody had the fake names. Like Russ Yeast plays for the Boston Red Sox or the Boston team. Like that's I swear in those video games, Ken Griffey Jr. is winning a run. So this is how I view their defense. They have a couple like interesting places. Like I like Kobe Durant, and then also like Ernest Jones. But like outside that, Byron Young's an interesting rookie. He's kind of he's older, but he's a late bloomer type. You know, he bounced around school, didn't start school till late. Good toolsy kind of guy. But outside of that, it's a lot of nothing. And they look small. They give up the most points this preseason, I believe. And when I went to their practice, I actually got to go to their practice and training camp. That's how it felt. Their offense, I think, is actually going to be okay. But because they just have some competency there, but I just think this defense is just wow. It's a lot of nothing. So we'll see how much Aaron Donald can carry him.
Yeah, I feel bad for Raheem Morris, man. Sorry, I had to cut you off.
No worries. I wanted to ask you specifically about that Rams secondary, and again, kind of going back to the Seahawks receiving core now with JSN and all the things that they can do now with that. How do you think that plays out on Sunday?
Well, they just are losing. You know, like some people are down on the guy, Jalen Ramsey. Still very good. They're losing one of the best star slot guys, and they're kind of patchworking the rest of it together. So that's where I think Jason is going to eat. Raheem Morris last year, especially their defense. This was bad about their defense last year. It wasn't as bad as this, and they were just known for getting peppered underneath, just hitches, slants, like short routes, just over because they just play super soft. They play the softest quarters and cover 6 you'll ever see. So I think this is a heavy JSN getting peppered underneath game because that's what this defense wants you to do. It's an old school line of thinking. Oh, the quarterback's going to make a mistake, but that's like something from like 1996 when you're playing like Rob Johnson, not like Geno Smith. So like that, or even like an Andy Dalton is doing it to you. Right. So it's that is, I think that a lot of underneath throws because that's what they want you to do. But now I think they took a huge step back from last year. So I think they're just going to feast underneath.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see Morris leaning into more fire zones just to change the math and speed things up, get different looks.
And that was Seattle's issue last year, kind of, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to generate some uneasiness, but then again, that's JSN right there because he's replacing he's the hot, so he's replacing the fire zone. So it's like that's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. But that's why you draft a JSN. It's just for that. Everyone's bringing slot pressure. Everyone brings slot pressure, but everyone leans into that now because that's everyone's favorite simulated pressure as well. So now you get those guys on linebackers sprinting out there, someone from the line, the jack sprinting out there. So now you get those guys, and that's a matchup advantage as opposed to, that's our fourth option.
Let's hope that wrist is okay. Because if it's not, we're putting a lot of eggs in the JSN basket here.
Yes.
Nate, in terms of the Rams' offense and the injuries that they have, primarily Cooper Kupp, and then what we've said about their defense, is this just going to be like run the ball as much as they can, or does McVay does he have anything without Cooper Kupp? I mean, obviously Matt Stafford is still the quarterback and in theory is healthy.
Yeah, it's the O-line is okay. I'll give it to the okay level. And Stafford is actually better than I think. Last year was so ugly, but he's still competent. He's very competent. He's pretty solid actually, but it's rough in that receiving room. Kind of Van Jefferson's kind of a replacement level player. I'll say it. I've never been high on Tutu Atwell because he's built like an Overwatch player. And then just like I like Puka Nacua, Overwatch League player, I should say. But Puka Nacua, I actually do like. I think a few of us that people that we know like, and they're going to use him a little bit. But it's hard for me to picture this run game, the running back room. I'm not high on Cam Akers. He doesn't have a lot of juice. They keep trying to make him work, but it doesn't really work. My favorite receiver or running back in their room is Ronnie Rivers, who's a guy they signed off the street in the middle of last year, and he had a nice preseason. He really did. I really like him. And then Kyron Williams is kind of like he was fun at Notre Dame. It was one of those, he got a lot of draft Twitter hype. And then like he ran a 4.6 something at like 180 pounds. And then everyone just stopped talking about him. But he actually is a nice, useful pass catching back and pass protector. But again, none of these guys have a lot of juice. Right. So I'm trying to figure out, it feels like a very tight game. It's like, if you could just keep that run game somewhat inefficient, I don't think they're going to pop a ton of explosives. And that's kind of nice for where the Seahawks, I think, run defense is at, and what they're trying to step forward this year. So it's not the most scary offense you go against, but it does have a solid quarterback and a solid offensive line.
Yeah, without Kupp, it's going to be weird because Stafford loves his favorites at receiver.
Oh yeah,
like throughout his career, and it's going to be weird him searching for that possession target. I mean, you wonder, like, is Tyler Higbee going to unlock a level of play that, I mean, he's a decent, tight end the way that they use him, but he's not like a, an elite second level, like pattern
runner. And the
Seahawks
have answers to like a Higbee. You know what I mean? Yeah, like because they're deep. The one area I feel like that's deep at defense, I know there's some injuries and everything, is the DB room. So like, I feel like that there's some competency there, or some like way to cover like a guy like Higbee as well. But that's a good point too. I know some people are very high on Higbee this year. Maybe that's just like a fantasy thing as opposed to a real life thing.
Yeah.
So finally, Nate, you've been very gracious with your time. Thank you. Switching our attention towards Denver, and we're not like bitter spurned exes. Denver is still relevant to Seattle, apart from the kind of increasingly morbid curiosity of Russell Wilson, because John Schneider had some fun with Denver and traded pick number 83 for pick number 108 and a 2024 third-round pick. So Seattle needs Denver to lose to get a really high third-round pick. So, Nate, you've played with Russell Wilson. I'm sure he's a lovely chap, but how's it going to be this year?
I think back to at least average. That's what I said this on our show, and my co-host kind of cut me off before I get through my whole point. But what I was trying to say was, like, I listened to this is a terrible metaphor for this, but I'm just going to roll back. I'm like a stand-up comedian working on a joke.
Keep going.
It's like this is my left head. I watched this Bee Gees documentary on HBO, and it's actually a very lovely documentary. I highly recommend it. But they were talking about how during their first stage, they kind of like fell out of favor. Like they became less popular. And then the producer was kind of like, that talent doesn't just go away. And my co-host was like, well, in sports, it does. And I was like, okay, that's a very fair point. But what I'm saying is that where Russ was at as worse than Zach Wilson, that's not real. Like he was bad last year, but not that bad. And the Broncos faced a lot of injury woes. I think they were the worst team in adjusted games last year, or one of the worst teams. Offensive line decimated, receiver injuries, just everything. It was the season from hell. And they had a head coach that you tell was in over his head. They kind of allowed Russ to get in too much. I know, again, you guys probably are neck deep in this stuff. So, but I think Sean Payton is Sean Payton. And I think people have forgot how freaking good Sean Payton is. That guy is a very good football coach, and he has a lot of pride. And I think that he's going to at least get Russ to okayness. I'm not saying good, I'm not saying top 10, 12, 14, but to that 18th area. Not what you paid for, not what they traded for, but at least where it's not like a national embarrassment. I'm actually high on the Broncos. I picked them to make the playoffs on our show. A little bit of a lukewarm take. I would say hot take. But a little bit of I don't think they face that injury luck. I really trust in Sean Payton. I trust the additions. I like their defense a lot. So I think they're going to be at least competent. Not a great team, but at least way better than they were last year, which was really, really bad.
Yeah, it really was a perfect storm. Like if I was a Broncos fan and refused to give in to being a cynic, I would just characterize it as a perfect storm.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, if Payton can get, the boot play actions going, if they can hit the deep post again, I mean, that at least gets you back to baseline with him, and then you can let that be your pivot point. Yeah.
Play the hits.
Exactly. They're going to use him like Jameis. And that's what people I don't think realize, or early career, early Saints Breeze Payton, which was a ton of heavy play actions. What we watched at Wisconsin in the offseason was Sean Payton and North Turner offenses. And that's because we liked Sean Payton's play action game, which was all vertical. And who was great at a vertical play action game? Russell Wilson. And Sean Payton has said a million times, we're gonna, like, in his own way, we're gonna pound the freaking rock. And that's what Russell has always needed, as we all know. Ever since I was with him in 2011 at Wisconsin, that's what our offense was. He had games running through it 14 or 15 times. And it was great. Don't get me wrong. He averaged like 20 yards a pop. It was awesome. But that was the offense. That's what and it also helps him, gives him space away from the offensive line, gives him space to look down the field, gives him space to create. He did scramble a little bit more this preseason, which was good to see, because that's decreased a lot the last couple of years. So I think Peyton has a way to use him that's already, there's proof of him using him that way. So that's why I think that there's going to be a lot more paths to competency than people realize. I know I'm on a Seahawks pod. I'm supposed to just go, it should be all right.
You're meant to tell us they get the first third rounder.
I feel like you guys already got it last year. Like, that was like starting with game one. Couldn't have gotten any better if you wrote a script.
Listen, we broke our brains watching and trying to figure out Russell Wilson, the good and the bad, which of course mostly good, right? But we still broke our brains watching it. So we'll always be fascinated by him as a football entity.
And I'm kind of fascinated by how Sean Payton's managed to kind of recontrol the narrative around the whole situation. It's very interesting, and I think this year we're going to see a much better balance for Russell's game. So not good news for that third round pick. But
Sean Payton's a big personality, as he's kind of already shown, and so that's needed though. They kind of said we need a bigger trump card than the one we just signed. We need one that's even bigger than the one that we just brought in last year. So, and that's what they did. That's why I just am betting on that. It's funny you talk about that, Griff. Russ is a great example that good and great quarterbacks, they all win in such different ways. And I think a lot of us, for me, I thought great quarterback play for years and years is going to look like Peyton Manning, and sits back the sheriff and pointing and doing all this stuff. And I think a lot of us did, and even like what Rodgers was doing and signaling and everything. But then you realize all these guys win in such different ways. Even if we say, oh, he's a good athlete, or oh, he has a big arm. How Mahomes wins and Josh Allen wins and Herbert and Burrow and Lamar and Aaron Rodgers, how these guys all win is so wildly different. And I think that's freaking awesome, because a lot of sports, I think, for people that are around my age, like kind of like older millennials, is we kind of got caught in the middle where everyone's like, well, you have to do it this way because that's the most efficient. When I was playing baseball, everyone was like, you have to throw like Roger Clemens. He's the best pitcher. That's the most perfect motion. You have to throw it like him. And then they realize, oh, you can throw it sidearm. You can throw it funky. You can change your pitch. You can pause as you're about to throw. Same with quarterback play. And I think that's really cool. I think that's Russell was one part of that kind of movement. I think
it's so interesting how just sports in general, like even cricket in this country, or even cricket across the globe, not obviously much in America, but cricket's gone for a similar thing where there's a very orthodox style of batting, and then suddenly wild shots are getting played, and there was a thought that was the wrong way to play or too risky, and then now it's just taken over the game. So that analogy really does resonate, and I wonder what inspired that across sports. I don't know. Anyway, Nate,
we'll never know.
It's all where my brain could go to. I'm sorry, guys.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Nate.
If you don't already follow Nate, you should, because he's one of the best followers on Twitter. Amazing football content at Nate_Tice. Do you have anything you'd like to promote, Nate, or?
Not really. You can hear me on the Athletic Football Show, our first live show this Sunday, or not our first of the season, I should say. So check that out, and you can find my articles now on Yahoo, The Overhang, which it was just a bullshit name we came up with. I'm an offensive guy. I was like,
hey, we love overhang.
It works though.
I know it works. It ended up. It was one of those where my editor said it. I was like, yeah, sure. Actually, that's way better than anything I've come up with. But thank you guys so much.
It's your appeal to the defensive minded.
Right
out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Just hope you don't get a B gap bubble.
That's it. Hey, the offensive mind is you run at the bubble till it bursts. So that's how I view the bubble.
You want to kill your overhang.
Yes, absolutely. Guys, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Nate. Thanks, man.
Of course.
Appreciate
you.